if you imagine every time you talk about the issue of abortion, if you imagine the person that you're talking to has had an abortion, just like Caroline, and maybe has never told anybody else, it will change the way that you talk about things because you're imagining their story. And when we hear people's stories, it changes us. It gives you more compassion. And so I always encourage people, just imagine every time you open your mouth, every time you say something on social media, imagine the person that you're talking to has had an abortion and they haven't told you, they haven't told anybody else in their lives, and it'll change you.
Everything you do from then on is different.
One of the detectives, I think his name was
He was a
Derek.
golden boy.
And all we can do right now is come together.
Extreme domestic violence, multiple rapes.
Hey, so glad to have you on Life Support. We tell stories to help you find a deeper relationship with Jesus through suffering and trauma. So I'm so glad you're here. And we're going to spend some time dealing with a very difficult topic, and it's incredibly important. So I'm glad you're here to take part with us. I have very special guests with me from New Life Family Services. We'll learn more about that organization. Tammy Coker is the executive director. I also have Caroline Biener here, who's the program manager for a part of this organization. She'll explain that too, and part of her story. So ladies, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.
So let's start with you, Tammy. Tell me a little bit about New Life Family Services. What is this organization all about?
Sure. Well, New Life has been around since 1973, offering help and hope to those facing an unplanned pregnancy. And so we kind of do that through three primary service areas. One, we are a licensed adoption agency, so we serve both birth families and adoptive families throughout the entire process. Secondly, we have our First Care Pregnancy Centers. Those are our storefront locations where we help those facing unplanned pregnancies, so pregnancy testing, ultrasounds. We have licensed social workers that work with clients through decision making, just in the midst of, what they want to do with their pregnancy. We have a huge parenting education program, and we also do free STD testing and treatment. So that's all part of our First Care programs. And then our third program is where Caroline is the program manager for, and that is our Conquerors Post-Abortion Support Ministry. So it is a program that helps women and couples who are struggling with a past abortion find hope and healing and redemption in Christ. And she can certainly share more about that.
Yes, and we're glad that she can. Tell me a little bit about, before we dive into Caroline's story, many of the areas you're dealing with have been kind of pushed to the side by culture as, well, why would you bother? It's just part of life that a woman would make this choice and then move on with her life. That's not really true, though, is it?
It's not. I think an unplanned pregnancy in particular, but really any pregnancy is life-changing, no matter what decision you make. If you choose to parent, certainly your life is going to look differently. If you choose to place for adoption, your life is going to look different. And if you choose abortion, it's going to have an impact on your life as well. And so our goal is really to empower women and men and families to be fully informed about their decisions and to really come alongside and support them so that they can make a decision that they feel good about, they're prepared for, and to just really support them throughout the process.
Caroline, I know this is a very personal issue for you, and you have a story, and I really appreciate you having the courage to come and talk to us about it. First of all, what do you do at New Life exactly? What is your role there?
So I'm the program manager, and what that means, I'm a one-woman show along with my volunteers. I have a wonderful team of volunteers, and so what I do is I do a lot of scheduling of Conquerors groups, a lot of curriculum review, getting the word out about Conquerors, and then meeting with those clients to get them registered for a group. And sometimes I'm actually facilitating those groups, especially with COVID. I've been doing a lot of that lately. And if we have someone, or if we have a woman who's not comfortable going into a group, or we have a couple that want to go through Conquerors together, then I'll work with them one-on-one. And we'll use the same curriculum that the groups use. I take them through that program at their own pace. So many hats, but it's been just a real blessing.
Yeah, it sounds like you're ministering to a lot of people. And you come at it from a perspective where you've been there. Tell me about that. Take us back to kind of where your story began, and tell me why this is so important to you.
Sure. So So my story began, I come from a divorced home. I'm an only child, and just had a lot of trauma in childhood. My mother suffered from addiction and bipolar disorder. Dad was not in my life growing up. And so, unfortunately, those things, I didn't have a lot of structure or stability growing up. And so kind of had to make some decisions on my own without any guidance, unfortunately. I guess fast forward to as a teenager, I had met the one and really fell in love with this gentleman who was going into the Navy. And I was 16, 17 at this time. And we were having sex outside of marriage. We were together, and he moved out to California where he was stationed, and I went with him. And found out I was pregnant. That was pretty devastating, and I think I didn't process it right away. I think there was some time that lapsed from the time that I knew I was pregnant and, like, what am I going to do? A big piece of that was because in the Navy, he would go out to sea. So just like you think, like, a story and an adventure, it's really true. They do go out to sea for months at a time, and back then we only had the mail to communicate, and so we had this big decision to make through mail, and it would be weeks before I would get a letter or before he'd get mine, and so trying to make this decision, what are we going to do with this about this? I obviously didn't have support at home. We were living in a new place all alone, scared kids out in California, and his family was came from a very religious background, and his mother didn't approve of me to begin with. So, how are we going to explain this? What are we going to do? And so we waffled. There was a time where we thought, we can do this, but I was nannying for a family, living on a floor with a blanket and a pillow, and it just wasn't, in our minds, it wasn't realistic. And unfortunately, we didn't have a place like First Care Pregnancy Center, that would come alongside and, like, you can do this, we can support you. So what we were hearing was just the noise of the culture, which was there is abortion, and, this problem will go away after you have this procedure. No one has to know about it. And so in our young minds, that's what made the most sense to us. So we made that decision. We made it together, and I had the procedure out in California. I don't even know how. I don't know how. I didn't pay for it. I don't know any of the details, really. It was, I think it speaks to just how easily accessible it is. And so because a lot of time had passed, like I said, with mail and trying to make this decision, unfortunately, my pregnancy was a second trimester, and so that abortion procedure was a 2-day procedure and very traumatic. But we just picked ourselves up and moved on, and actually married anyway, in spite of all this, 2 years later. We eloped, actually, but that's a different story. And when he got out of the Navy, we moved back here to Minnesota, where we were both born and raised, and just moved on with life. While we were raised in Christian homes, we were never shared the gospel, and we did not have that intimate relationship with Christ. So when we came back home, after 9/11 happened, someone had shared the gospel with my husband at work. And that's a really sweet story because he's a garbage man. And so it was a coworker who shared with him on the job, which is just awesome in its own story. But he led me to Christ. And then we were able to, then we shared Jesus with our children and our kids. We had 3 children by this time, and they were all pretty young. And but I think for me, I think with anybody who comes to Christ, the first thing they're really faced with is dealing with their sin and their past and having to reconcile to the Lord. So that was a big, that was hard to do for me. I had a lot of depression, a lot of guilt and shame. And even though I had heard the gospel a number of times, something wasn't resonating. And for me, I really struggled with being able to, I knew conceptually, Jesus died on the cross. That's what they say. That's what the Bible says. But I just can't forgive myself. And really, that was flawed thinking on my part, but I didn't know it at the time. And so it wasn't until I just heard that gospel shared another way, just by a different person, where they actually addressed that, when we make it about us, we're not making it about Jesus, and it is about him, and it's about what he did on the cross. And then everything clicked for me, and I thought, you know what, I need more. And so I reached out. I knew I needed help for this past pain, and I found Conquerors. I went through the program. It was great. But I still struggled a little bit, and so it took time. It took time for me to really rest in, to trust really that Jesus had died on the cross even for this sin. And whatever it is that you're struggling with, once you realize that, just that peace that floods you is like something you can't explain to anybody. And so you just really want people to know that. And so time went on. I worked in healthcare most of my life, and I was very passionate about this. I was really passionate about talking about abortion in the church as well. My husband and I would, we'd attend church on Sundays, and we just knew that there are so many people who need to hear about this forgiveness that can only come from Christ. And so it was a total God thing when I was looking for a career change and applied for a position at New Life. Not this position, but a different position, and went through the interview process. And they said, you know what, we'd like you to consider this. And so it was really the Lord that brought me to this position where I can now share my story with those who are really struggling in that really dark place.
Good for you. And that's what God does. He takes our past and he weaves it together for his purpose for us. Mm-hmm. And Tammy, you can weigh in on this question as well. It seems to me that you talk about how we address abortion in the church, and that from a kind of a macro level, we can talk about it as much as we want. We want to get behind pro-life causes. We want to go to marches. We're all excited about that. But I rarely hear anyone discuss personal stories of abortion. Why is that?
Well, I think, in our society, it has become such a polarizing topic. So I think even there are a lot of churches that don't talk about it at all, because it's first of all, it's intensely personal, as you know. And then secondly, it's just our society is screaming, if you don't support abortion, you hate women, which could not be farther from the truth. And so I think churches a lot of times don't know how to talk about it. And, when I look at it from a macro level, as you said, there was a survey done a couple years ago, and it reported that 36% of women having abortions were regularly attending a Christian church at least once a month at the time of their abortion. So 36% of all those abortions were women who are attending our churches. And the really sad piece of that is that the majority of those women, over 70%, said that the church had absolutely no influence on their decision to terminate. And so I look at that and say, as the body of Christ, we have got to do better. Because if we do not talk about this issue, and we do not talk about it in a truth-filled but also grace-filled way, people are going to continue to have abortions in our churches, and we don't even know it. And then the second part of that is the women like Caroline. I cannot tell you how many women have shared with me that they sat in church for 20 years experiencing abortion and not feeling like anybody else there could possibly understand what they've gone through because they've never heard the church talk about it. And so they're sitting in their shame and their guilt. And the church is great about talking about all kinds of broken things and broken people. And we talk about infidelity, we talk about pornography, we talk about drug and alcohol addiction, but we don't talk about the trauma of abortion. And so people are stuck there not knowing that healing and forgiveness and redemption is available just like it is with every other sin.
So as from a pastoral perspective, I'm thinking about you, Caroline, and I'm thinking about different types of sin that people sit with and the kind of shame that goes on there. I'm afraid of hurting you. And do pastors hurt you when they talk about it, or hurt other women when they talk about it?
You know, I can tell you honestly, that's never, I've never had that situation. Because in the churches that, you know, once my husband and I came to the conclusion that we needed forgiveness and healing for this, the church wasn't talking about it. So we haven't had that experience where someone has spoken about it and then said, you know, how can we minister to you? We haven't had that experience.
Yeah, it seems that from what you're saying, that it would be foolish to think that abortion is outside of the church, in other words.
For sure.
Right.
And so we tend to think that. We tend to look at the people in front of us. Well, there's no way that's happening here. That's out there. But apparently that's not the case.
It's not the case. And, you know, one thing I would say to you that has really changed my perspective on how to talk about the issue, and I talk with people all the time about this, but if we don't talk about it, it's a problem. And if we do talk about it in a harsh or negative way, it's also a problem. And you can hurt somebody. And so it can push them deeper and deeper into the shame and the guilt and the regret. But if you imagine every time you talk about the issue of abortion, if you imagine the person that you're talking to has had an abortion, just like Caroline, and maybe has never told anybody else, it will change the way that you talk about things because you're imagining their story. And when we hear people's stories, it changes us. It gives you more compassion. And so I always encourage people, just imagine every time you open your mouth, every time you say something on social media, imagine the person that you're talking to has had an abortion and they haven't told you, they haven't told anybody else in their lives, and it'll change you.
And that will put grace to your words.
Absolutely.
And your thought processes. So, Caroline, you were talking about culture earlier, and you said that you were just under the impression that you would have this procedure and you'd be done.
Right.
Not true?
Right. No, so not true. Not true at all. For years. I think initially, everyone's story is a little bit different. So for me, I was a teenager, and I think in my young mind, this problem for a moment did go away, but it came back quickly, and it really came back when God blessed us with our 3 living children, and just that pain. I talk to women who, they come to me after 50 years. They come to Conquerors after 50 years of harboring this secret.
Wow.
So it doesn't go away for most of us. And I think for me, a big piece of my, really having to sort through it was when I became a believer. And we're shown our sin, we're facing that head on. And I think perhaps that's why we see women come so many years after an abortion. They come to us. They're more mature in their thinking, and many of them have come to know the Lord since then, and they're really grappling with what they've done.
Yeah, and you not only have the sin part of it, but you've got grief,
right?
Loss. All of that must just be really, really hard to deal with.
Right, because also you hear society say you shouldn't grieve this loss. You shouldn't grieve it because it either wasn't a loss or because you did it.
Right.
So you're not allowed to grieve that loss.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, Tammy, as you deal with all of these different types of issues, and you're offering alternatives, you're counseling women, all these things, what kind of success rate do you have if you can get a woman to talk with you and really be able to explain to them what's happening in front of them? Do they stop and reconsider, or do they more than often than not plow ahead and go ahead with the abortion.
Yeah, it's certainly a mixed thing. And over the years that has changed. We have been doing ultrasounds at New Life for 20 years now. And, initially when we started doing ultrasounds, it was really impactful because people didn't know it was a life. Caroline, imagine if you had had an ultrasound, a second trimester ultrasound back then, it would make a huge impact. Well, nowadays technology is so prevalent, people have seen all of that. But what we're finding is, abortion in Minnesota, 60% of women having abortions already have other kids. So that tells you it is not because they don't understand it's a baby. They've been pregnant before. They understand fetal development. They understand that their circumstances are really hard. And so for us, we kind of call ourselves holistically pro-life. Like, our goal is to really walk alongside every single person that walks through our door, meet them where they're at. Because just because we show them an ultrasound, which is still really valuable because it helps connect, like, I really am pregnant, but we also care about the whole person. And so what else is happening in your lives? And, what are the barriers from keeping you from continuing this pregnancy? And for so many women, their circumstances are just really hard. And so our focus is on how can we walk alongside you, help eliminate the barriers and support you? Because for a lot of women, they just don't have that support. So the success depends on the situation, but certainly when we support women, they make more informed and better decisions. And so that's kind of what our focus has been. And we now walk alongside, for those that choose to parent, our parenting program now goes until their youngest child is age 5. So we're in this, with them for the long haul, because we don't want to just say, don't have an abortion and then we abandon you.
Yeah.
Because so many of our clients in our parenting program, they have never, much like Caroline, they have not seen good parenting. They don't understand, they're living in their own trauma. And so being able to walk alongside them and show them a different way and to really walk that journey with them is where I would say the holistic piece of being pro-life really comes in. We're not just against abortion. We are for life, and we're for supporting life along the way.
And how can you get a hold of New Life?
Easiest way would be on our website, nlfs.org. But yeah, that's the easiest way. We have 4 locations, 3 in the Twin Cities, 1 in Rochester, and then we are actually opening a 5th location in the Phillips community of Minneapolis, starting construction hopefully in the spring.
Oh, good for you. Well, I have so many more questions to ask. We'll do that next time we're together. Thank you so much for being here, both of you, and dealing with this difficult topic. Caroline, thank you for sharing your story.
Thank you.